For President Ford, the year seemed full of snags. In June, he fell down the plane steps on arriving in Austria. But a whole lot more serious were the two attempts to assassinate him. The first occurred on September 5th as the president was walking to the Capitol building in Sacramento.
First off, let me get your name.
Oh, my name is Myron Siggety. I'm from Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm on my way down here to Hilton Head Island this morning. It's a little early to be out like this. But I think his choice is, personally think it's excellent, because here's a man that does have a public record and one of great success, and he also has indicated an ability to lead and to get along with other people and be much less controversial, if that's the right word, than some people we've had around lately.
What do you think Congressman Ford will, in effect, be a caretaker vice president or a potential candidate for 1976?
Oh, I would have to believe he's a potential candidate, yes. But I think it's too early to tell whether or not he really wants to be president. Although I suppose every politician does, or he wouldn't be there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Spell your name.
Sigaty.
So, first, give me your name, please.
Penland, Norris Penland.
Yeah, how do you spell it?
Penland.
Where's your home?
Hollywood, Florida.
All right, what's your reaction to Mr. Nixon's choice for vice president?
I think it was probably as good a choice as he could have made under the circumstances.
Had you heard of Congressman Ford prior to last night?
Yes, I have.
So do you think he will, in effect, be a caretaker vice president or will be a potential candidate for 1976?
I think that I think he'd have to be a potential candidate now.
Well, you say now that I take it you had reservations prior to last night.
Well, he'll be in the national spotlight now, where he wasn't before.
What do you think Mr. Ford was the best possible choice available to Mr. Nixon?
I would say that it was as good a choice as he could have made, I would think.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Give me your name, please.
Frankie L. Shaw.
You live in Atlanta?
East Point.
What do you think of Mr. Nixon's choice of a potential vice president?
I think it's a very good choice that he made, picking Mr. Gerald Ford.
Had you heard of Mr. Ford prior to the announcement last night?
No, can't say I had.
Who would have been your choice?
Right now, I wouldn't know.
Now, do you feel like Mr. Ford is going to be a caretaker vice president or a possible candidate for president in '76?
Well, I think that they was gonna I think they is gonna pick. You know, they would endorse him. The House would endorse Mr. Ford before they would Mr. Conley. I think that's who he wanted to pick.
Why do you think they would endorse him before, say, Mr. Conley?
Well, I wouldn't want to say. I wouldn't say why they would pick Mr. Conley. I wouldn't know why they would pick Mr. Conley.
Thank you. It's Mrs. Lillian Jones. Mrs. Jones, how do you feel about President Nixon's selection for a vice president?
Well, I think that I'm satisfied. I know you, I was so upset about everything that I haven't really thought about it too much. And since I'm out of the country, you know, it's a little bit more difficult to really make up your mind.
How about you, Vicki? What do you think of the selection?
I expected the president to choose someone who wasn't very well known. I really did. And I'm not surprised at all of his choice. I was glad Conley didn't make it.
Why?
I don't know. I just don't like him.
But do you think Mr. Ford will make a good vice president?
I think what Nixon wants him to do. Just keep quiet.
You say he'll keep quiet. Do you
Right.
think a vice president should keep quiet?
No, I don't, but I think that's probably what his role will be until the end of the year, at least.
Mr. Jones, what is your feeling on the selection of Mr. Ford?
Oh, I like Mr. Ford. I was kind of surprised. I thought it would be Goldwater. But I think Mr. Ford would make a very good vice president.
You had heard of Mr. Ford prior to last night.
Oh, yes, for years.
Do you think he will, in effect, be a caretaker vice president? Or?
No, sir. No, I don't think so. But I think he won't do as much talking. He'll be more of an action vice president.
Thank you. This is Albert Childry of Atlanta. Mr. Chip... Damn things. Mr. Childry, what do you think of Mr. Nixon's choice for a vice president?
I think he made a very good selection.
Would Mr. Ford have been your first choice?
I hadn't thought too much about him, but now that I've heard it, I think he made a very good selection.
Well, do you think Mr. Ford will, in effect, be a caretaker vice president, as a lot of people have said?
I really wouldn't like to answer that. I don't know.
Well, you had heard of Congressman Ford prior to last night.
Yes.
Thank you. This is Mr. James E. Jones of Delray Beach, Florida. Mr. Jones, what is your reaction to the selection of Congressman Ford as a possible vice president?
I think it's a very wise decision, and has both approval of both parties in the House. I feel that this move can be of great assistance. I don't know, there were many men that were very capable, but of fulfilling this position, I think the president made a wise choice.
Do you think that Mr. Ford will in effect be a caretaker vice president, as many have said, or?
I think Mr. Ford will render every assistance to this country that he is well-trained for and capable of doing.
But do you see him as a potential candidate for 1976?
This is too early to predict that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Mrs. John Stitt of Macon, Georgia. Mrs. Stitt, what is your feeling on the selection of Congressman Ford as a potential vice president?
As far as I can tell, it seems to be a very good choice. Very good choice.
Had you heard of Congressman Ford prior to last night?
I've heard him speak before. Yes, I think he's excellent.
Well, a lot of people are saying that he will be a caretaker vice president. How do you feel about this?
That might be all right.
Thank you. It's Oliver Scott of Atlanta. Mr. Scott, you were watching last night when President Nixon nominated Congressman Ford as vice president. How do you feel about Congressman Ford as a vice president?
What I know of him, I think he's a very good choice.
Had you heard of the congressman prior to last night?
Yes, I have.
Well, a lot of people are saying that he will in effect be a caretaker vice president. How do you feel about this?
Well, like I say, what I know of him, I think he's a very good choice. I think he would make a very good vice president.
Would he?
In my opinion.
Would he have been your first choice?
I don't know.
Thank you. Okay, this is Tommy Nelson of Decatur, Georgia. Tommy, what do you think of Congressman Ford as a possible vice president?
Well, my concern really is just very little about Ford, because in the past, I had known that Ford had, from what I read, I known that Ford had did some little shaky things himself in government. And I think very little of it. And plus, he's such a close friend and has such a close relationship with Nixon. And after the Watergate incident, and anyone that being involved with Nixon, I have very little trust for him.
I take it then you would have preferred to have seen someone else.
Well, yes, someone else.
Who would have been your choice?
perhaps Connolly ought to have given him a shot at it.
Do you think the vice president at this stage should be a caretaker or a man who is possibly going to run for president in 76?
More or less caretaker. Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. Of Atlanta.
Do it again.
Cindy Cox of Atlanta. Cindy, were you watching last night when Mr. Nixon made his choice for vice president?
Yes, I was.
What do you think of his choice?
I didn't know that much about the man previous to this, but I watched the commentary on it last night, and he seems like a very, wise choice for the vice presidency.
Who would have been your first choice?
Well, it's hard to say. It would have been a Democrat.
Thank you, Cindy.
Okay.
This is Police Officer T.A. Barnwell of Cobb County, Georgia. Were you watching last night when Mr. Nixon made his announcement for vice president?
I was not watching, but I've been informed of the announcement, sir.
What is your opinion of Congressman Ford?
Congressman Ford is a staunch supporter of Richard Milhouse Nixon, as everyone knows. And why don't y'all just give up and go home?
Okay, this is a restart on Officer T.A. Barnwell. What is your opinion of Congressman Ford as a potential vice president?
Well, considering Richard Milhouse Nixon has used him as an appointee, and he's been a staunch supporter throughout his term in Congress, his chances of being vice president are pretty good. Seems like Mr. Nixon gets his way in mostly everything. But I don't know if he'd be an independent man. He seems to be a second man all the way. A yes, sir man to me. And I'm not a Republican, as you may notice. But it's going to be for a 3-year term, no doubt. And it seems like both houses of Congress will ratify his appointment. And Mr. Ford, no doubt, will probably be our next vice president.
Well, under the circumstances, do you think Mr. Nixon had any choice?
Mr. Nixon had quite a few choices. He took the one he wanted, Mr. Ford. Quite a few, Governor Connolly and ex-Governor Connolly, and quite a few people around, a little bit more liberal than Mr. Ford. And he's going along with his court, too, on the conservative attitude all the way.
Thank you. This is Police Officer A.E. Alderman of Clayton County, Georgia. What is your feeling on the selection of Congressman Ford as a vice president?
Well, sir, I listened to the news broadcast last night, and I think that Congressman Ford is sincere in what he says, and I think Nixon has made a wise choice. That's all there's a comment.
Had you heard of Congressman Ford prior to last night?
I've heard of him.
You know anything about him?
No, sir. I just know that he sounds like a sincere man, and I think Nixon made a wise choice.
Well, do you think the vice president at this point should be a caretaker or someone who is a potential candidate for 76?
I think we need somebody in there that's a potential candidate for 76.
You see Mr. Ford as a potential candidate?
Possibly.
Thank you. This is Mrs. T.F. Harden of Commerce, Georgia. Mrs. Harden, were you watching last night when the president announced his selection of a vice president?
Yes, I was.
What do you think of Congressman Ford as a potential vice president?
He seems to be a very popular man.
Had you heard of Congressman Ford prior to the announcement?
Oh, yes, I'd heard of him before.
Do you think that he will, in effect, be a caretaker vice president or one that is a potential candidate for president in 76?
Well, let's hope that he'll be a good person for the place.
Do you think he should be a caretaker?
We hope so, yes. We hope he will be.
Thank you. Roll, Charlie. This is Sid Johnson of Atlanta. Were you watching last night when Mr. Nixon made his announcement on the vice president?
Fortunately, no. I was in law school.
But you've heard by now that Congressman Ford. What is your opinion of Congressman Ford as a potential vice president?
I think he's a good man.
Had you heard of Congressman Ford prior to this?
Not much, but I had heard of a few things that he's done.
Good or bad?
All generally good things about him. He wasn't the big name, I think, that a lot of people thought that Nixon might go after, such as Conley or somebody else.
What do you think someone with a better known name politically would have been a better, wiser choice?
I really couldn't say.
How about the question of caretaker vice president against someone who will be a potential candidate in 76? Do you think a caretaker is what we need now?
I think the whole way they run the vice presidency is a little bad anyway, because the man ought to have a job with some responsibilities, something more than they currently give them. That's what we have now as a caretaker vice president. All they do is just go in, greet people, have a few minor committees to sit in on, and that's it.
Thank you. This is Jack Newman of Daytona Beach, Florida. Mr. Newman, what do you think of the selection of Congressman Ford as a potential vice president?
Well, I don't think President Nixon could have made a better one. I'm a former Michiganite myself, and I know Ford has done a marvelous job for 25 years, and I think that he'll be an outstanding vice president.
What do you think Mr. Ford will do, as some people say, and be just a caretaker vice president?
No way. I think you'll see Ford as a top contender in 1976.
Thank you, sir. How about you? What do you think of Mr. Ford as a selection?
I concur with Mr. Newman's agreements entirely.
Thank you.
My name is Dorothy Werner, Jacksonville,